This mic sucks. It's new. Anyways, today we're going to talk about the problems that we had with our Plex build. So Pookie, behind the camera. Pookie, why don't you wave your hand in front of the camera real quick? There he is. He's going to read to me some of the issues that we had building this, and then I'm going to quickly recap them so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that we did. If you didn't watch our entry video, our Plex Plan video, then here I'm going to let you know that we were going to build a Plex server with an old T610, and a lot of people would say, why would you want to use a loud, power-hungry monster like a T610? And the short answer is that it was available. I just had an extra one. I know, right? Who has extra T610s? BuenaVista does. We were going to use it, and we plugged it in a couple of times with both of the 850 850 watt power supplies, and oh yeah, 870, yeah. And it blew out the power in our apartment building, and it's not a joke. I mean, it blew out the power everywhere. Twice. We tried it twice. We thought it was something else, but it was a T610. Anyways, because of that, we decided that we were going to build it. We were going to knock down the power to 570, and we figured that it would be enough to sustain the RAM and the processors that we wanted to use and all of that. So these are all of the problems that came along with the T610. So number one, if you're buying a T610, or if you want to build a Plex server and you have a T610, realize that it is going to get hot and loud, and it's going to use a lot of power. So if you have the proper voltage in your home, then by all means, if you have a closet you can put it in, you can remote to it, that by all means. But if you want to have this in your living room, it's probably not going to be a good idea. So number one, we tried quieting the fans down by replacing the manufacturer's fan with a Noctua 60 millimeter fan, I believe. We've successfully did it turned on, but that led us to a voltage error. The T610 did not like that we had an unlicensed fan in the power supply. So what did it do? It exploded. It was not happy. It blew up, and it said, you know what, we're not going to use this. I don't know, maybe it was feeding it too much power. It was it was probably feeding it too much power, or it probably just shut it off and the capacitors blew up. I'm not sure. Something happened in there. Any electrical engineers that are watching, I doubt that there are any. If there are, let me know what you think happened. Number two, what happened? Right, so then we plugged in a new CPU, and if you watched our CentOS install video, you would know that it killed the computer. It killed it. The new CPUs killed the computer. There was a voltage error. You would get, I think it's like E1000. I think that's like the general issue with it. I think that's like the general error that you have. Pookie, if you pull up the YouTube video real quick, I think in the description I have written down what the other error was. But basically, it'll tell you to reseat the CPU, and that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And what we think happened is that too much power got pushed into either the power panel, the back pane for the RAID controller, or the motherboard itself. And at that point, it was way too much work to try to swap out the motherboard or the power panel. So we just decided to opt out and just pick a whole new server, something better. So we upgraded to an R710. Yeah, so the iDRAC IPMI tool is dependent on the operator license that you got when you got the server. So if you had iDRAC version 6, you're not going to be able to upgrade to like version 9 or a later version if you didn't already have the license for it. So keep that in mind when you're buying older servers and you don't want to shell out any money for an iDRAC license. That's just part of it. The next error that we ran into were BIOS and UEFI related. So if you are buying an R710 and if you're buying a T610 or any of that whole series, right, all of those computers have reached end of life. They've reached EOL. So that means that Dell no longer supports them. And what I mean by that is that if you were to go to their repositories and try to update the BIOS, it's not going to do it. It won't let you do it. The reason it won't let you do it is because Dell, they gave some reasoning that, they wanted to save space or make it easier for people with newer models. But in actuality, many companies and many home lab users still use R710s. They still use T610s. They use the, T500s. They use the whole series. They use them all the time. So for them to have taken it off and just completely removed the different BIOS updates and the different versions out of the repositories is kind of messed up. But I don't know. I am not Dell. I don't run a company that big. So that being said, it makes it nearly, I wouldn't say nearly impossible, just very difficult. If you wanted to upgrade your BIOS, it's a bit of an odyssey to do it. All right, so this is really annoying. When we switched to the R710, everything seemed fine and dandy, right? So we had that 6 terabyte drive. We held back on buying any more of those because I wasn't sure how it was going to work with those older servers. But when we bought it and when we put it into the new R710, what ended up happening was that, first of all, the RAID controller wasn't up to date, so it couldn't read the 6 terabyte one. It only did the 2 terabytes out of the 6 terabytes. But I'll explain that later. But CentOS and RHEL, sorry, my eye, it's itchy. CentOS and RHEL, they removed one of the drivers for the RAID controller found in the R710 and the T610. So if you're running into that problem where you're installing CentOS and it doesn't know where to install something, that's because the driver that's necessary for CentOS to read the RAID controller in the Dell is nowhere to be found. Well, I think El Repo has it on his list, but if you're not a Linux user, it's going to be very hard for you to navigate that. It's going to be very hard for you to understand what to do, how to do it, how to inject a payload during the installation of CentOS. It's a big mess. So instead, because of that, we ended up having to switch to Ubuntu server. But hold on real quick. That was the MPT2 SAS driver. Yeah. Oh yeah, so then another thing is that when you're buying old servers, just remember they refurbish them, but sometimes they forget pieces. Both the R710 and the T610 had a dying or dead RAID controller battery, so we had to buy a new one. Right, so again, if you have the H700 RAID controller, which comes with the R710 and the T610, unless it might be another, I think it's like a 717 with the R710. Regardless, the one that you have, it's probably out of date. And if it's out of date, that means that if you have planned to punch in a whole bunch of 6 terabyte drives like we did, then it's only going to read 2 terabytes out of the 6. So 4 of those are going to go completely, they fall into oblivion. The computer doesn't know where they are, it can't read that high, it doesn't know where they're going. So instead you have to compensate by buying 5 more 2 terabyte drives, which is what we did.
Let me just jump in here real quick since I was the one that actually worked on Samba. So basically what happened was that a lot of the guides online made it seem like you could just input a couple of commands into the config file and everything would work fine, but that wasn't the case. And because of that, our config file became extremely bloated with all types of commands. And we finally found what worked for us, which was just opening up a couple of rules on the firewall and installing Nautilus, which is like the simplest way of creating a SAMBA Share file.
Samba. If you don't know how to set up Samba, we have a video to set up Samba, but it was a nightmare. We have a proper configuration file, something that works for us on Ubuntu. Oh yeah, so when we upgraded from the T610 to the R710 came with 64 gigabytes of RAM, of ECC RAM. That's a lot of power, and it didn't like the 570 watt PSUs that we were putting in it. So when we replaced the processors that were in that one with the one that we had, I forgot which one we had. I think it was like the 57 something, the 7550, I don't know. We replaced the two that it came with the two that we had ready for the T610, and when we replaced it, it wouldn't turn on because there wasn't enough power. It would turn on, it would post, but it wouldn't get past that, and it was saying, hey man, you don't have enough electricity, you don't have enough voltage because your processors are pretty powerful. We like what you're rocking, but we just don't have enough juice for it. So we had to get two 870 watts. So we went right back to where we started. Yeah, that's another one. So if you have gotten to the point where you're installing Plex and you've already installed Ubuntu Server or whatever operating system you're using, if you did not partition your hard drives correctly, right, it won't read it. It just won't read it. It'll see that it's there, but it won't be able to do anything with it. And no matter how many times you try, it won't fix it. It will not fix it. So make sure you're partitioning your hard drives correctly. Again, our videos should show you, they should walk you through, and you should be able to install Plex properly with that.
Yeah, we originally had it formatted to FAT32. That didn't work, and that put like a file transfer limit.
Oh yeah. Right. So eventually we got SAMBA set up, and we found out that the problem was that, I know, call us noobs, I've never set up a Plex server before, but we set up our drives to be FAT32 when they should have been ext4. What happened as a result was that you couldn't transfer file sizes more than like 10 megabytes over a network into your SAMBA Share, and that was obviously, it made it impossible to have a Plex server, because if I was burning movies on my computer and I wanted to transfer them over to the Plex server, then it was literally impossible to do it. Yeah. So, and again, you're going to read in a lot of places that, do this, do that, blah, 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 blah. No, it's simply just reinstall, partition correctly, ext4. There you go, problem solved. So, all of that being said, what we ended up doing was having an R710 with 64 gigs of RAM, 12 terabytes of space, those 75, 52, whatever processors, I can't remember. I'm going to correct myself. I'm going to do it. Watch. Yeah, Ubuntu Server instead of CentOS. And yeah, and ext4 for the file extension. That's what you should be using to make your SAMBA Share. All of that being said, Plex works great. We didn't give up, and neither should you. Follow the recommendations in this video. I'm not saying to ignore the other ones, because there's a lot of good information in the other ones, but follow the recommendations in this video and use the other ones for reference or just for entertainment, either way. But in the end of the day, the R710 works great. It's quiet, it sits in my living room. We tested Plex everywhere. In Connecticut, we tested it from our home to work. We tested in a lot of different places, and it works great. So if you need more help on adjusting your Plex, again, the last video before this one, that one should help you do that. I have some tips, I have some advice on how to file name, on how to change some of the settings to make it work best for you. But anyways, thanks for being on this adventure. It was tough, but like I said, don't give up. We didn't. It'll work for you. And we're going to keep making videos. You're going to like what we come up with next. We got a few fun things in store for you. But anyways, thanks for hanging in there. If you didn't watch the CentOS install video, and if you like movies like Jacob's Ladder, go watch our CentOS install. That's all I'm going to say. It's worth it. Yeah. I hope you enjoy the rest of the content.
I'm dying in this car. I'm boiling alive.